The knock on my door came sharp, almost angry, like the person on the other side was ready for a fight. When I opened it, there she was, Karen from the HOA, clipboard clutched like it was a weapon, lips curled in that familiar mix of judgment and fake authority. But this time, she wasn't complaining about my lawn or where I parked. No, this time, she pointed directly at my dog, Max. "You can't keep him here," she barked. "The HOA has rules. No animals over 30 pounds. He violates the policy. He has to go." I laughed at first, thinking she was joking, but the fury in her eyes told me she was dead serious. My stomach twisted as I looked down at Max, sitting calmly at my side, his harness neatly buckled, the bright patch stitched across the strap reading, "Service animal, do not pet." This wasn't just about a pet. Max wasn't a luxury, wasn't just a companion. He was my lifeline. After the accident that left me struggling with PTSD, he had been trained to steady me during panic attacks, alert me to sudden episodes, and even wake me from nightmares. Without Max, some days I could hardly function. But Karen didn't see that. She saw a violation, a way to flex her power, another chance to make someone bow to the rules she worshipped. What she didn't know, though, was that Max was protected under federal law. What she didn't expect was that her little crusade against my dog would turn into a legal storm that left her red-faced and silenced in front of the entire neighborhood. And when the truth came out, it wasn't me who stood exposed, it was her. The sun was just beginning to rise when I clipped Max's service vest onto his back and opened the front door. The air was cool, the kind that makes you breathe a little deeper and feel thankful for another morning. Max sat patiently, his brown eyes alert, waiting for my nod before stepping out onto the sidewalk. He was always like that, steady, calm, never rushing me. Some people saw just a big German shepherd. I saw my lifeline. Max and I had our morning routine down to perfection. We walked to the park 2 blocks away, took a loop around the small pond, then returned home in time for me to brew coffee before starting the day. The rhythm of it was more than habit, it was therapy. The movement, the quiet, the grounding presence of Max kept me anchored. He was trained to notice when my breathing quickened, when panic crept in, when the shadows of my accident tried to pull me under again. A gentle nudge from his nose, or the way he leaned his body against me, could stop the storm before it swallowed me. Neighbors usually waved when they saw us. Mrs. Henderson from the corner always offered Max a smile and a good boy. From her porch, kids riding bikes slowed down to stare at his vest, often whispering to each other about how official he looked. Most people understood he was more than a pet. He was part of me, but not everyone saw it that way. As Max and I turned onto my street that morning, I spotted Karen. Even from a distance she stood out. Perfectly pressed blouse, stiff khaki slacks, oversized sunglasses that looked out of place in the early morning light. She stood with her arms crossed, scanning the neighborhood like a watchdog. Karen had been on the HOA board for as long as I'd lived here, and she treated the bylaws like they were holy scripture. Her favorite hobby was catching people in violations to tall grass, a mismatched mailbox, even a slightly faded curtain in one neighbor's window. Nothing was too small for her scrutiny. I felt my chest tighten the moment she spotted Max. Her head tilted slightly, and her lips pursed in a way I had come to recognize. Trouble. She walked briskly across the street, her heels clicking against the pavement with sharp, impatient beats. Max noticed her movement, but true to his training, he stayed calm by my side. His ears twitched, but he made no sound. "Excuse me," she called, though she was already close enough that I could see the faint wrinkle of disapproval etched into her forehead. "Do you live in number 14? "Yes," I said carefully, adjusting my grip on Max's leash. Her gaze dropped to him, scanning the harness strapped snugly over his back. The words embroidered on the patch, "Service animal, do not pet," plain as day. But Karen wasn't one to be swayed by facts that didn't fit her agenda. "You know, dogs over 30 pounds aren't allowed in this community," she said sharply, her voice dripping with authority. "It's in the bylaws. He's far too big to be kept here." I felt my jaw tighten. I had expected this conversation someday, but I hadn't thought it would happen so soon or so aggressively. I took a slow breath, reminding myself of the strategies my therapist had taught me. "Stay calm, stay firm, Karen," I said evenly. "Max is a service animal. He isn't a pet. The rules about size don't apply to him." Her eyebrows shot up, as though I had told her the sky was green. "A service animal, please. That's just an excuse people use when they want to skirt the rules. He's obviously just a pet, and a large one at that." She glanced around, as if hoping neighbors would back her up. Max stood still beside me, his presence grounding me. He didn't flinch, didn't bark, didn't even look at Karen. He simply sat, his head tilted slightly upward, waiting for me. His calmness contrasted so sharply with her flustered energy that I almost smiled. "I have paperwork," I said firmly. "Documentation from my doctor. Max is legally recognized as my service animal. You don't have the authority to say otherwise." Her lips thinned into a tight line. For a moment, she seemed taken aback, but Karen never admitted defeat, not in public, not even in small things. She shifted her weight, her voice rising just a little louder. Well, I'll need to see that paperwork. Otherwise, I'll be filing a violation report. You'll be hearing from the HOA. The threat hung in the air. I knew enough about Karen to understand that she wouldn't let this drop. She thrived on confrontation, on flexing what little power she thought she had. Fine, I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. I'll be glad to show you what you need to see. But understand this: what you're asking, the way you're speaking to me, is walking very close to harassment. Max is not going anywhere. That's the law. Her cheeks flushed. But instead of backing down, she huffed, "We'll see about that," and spun on her heel, stomping back across the street. Her heels clattered against the pavement until she disappeared into her front yard. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. Max nudged my hand with his nose, sensing the shift in my breathing. I crouched down, pressing my forehead lightly against his. "Good boy," I whispered. His tail thumped softly against the ground. Steady, reassuring. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I knew Karen well enough to know she wouldn't let this drop. She would dig through the HOA rulebook, highlight every line she thought applied, and march back to me with threats of fines and legal action. She had done it to others, neighbors who had parked in the wrong spot or painted their doors a shade too bright. But this wasn't about paint or parking. This was about my life, my health, my independence. Max wasn't optional. He was essential. As I sat at the kitchen table later that afternoon, Max lying quietly at my feet, I gathered the paperwork I kept neatly in a folder. His certification, his training documents, the letter from my doctor explaining his role. Flipped through each page, feeling both grateful and weary. Grateful that the law was on my side. Weary that I would have to fight to defend what should have been unquestionable. Outside, I saw Karen pacing her porch, phone pressed to her ear. She glanced at my house more than once, her lips moving quickly as if relaying urgent news. I didn't need to hear her words to know she was already preparing her next move. By evening, I sat on the couch with Max's head resting in my lap. The television murmured quietly in the background, but my mind wasn't on it. Instead, I thought of the battles I had already fought, the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the endless uphill climb of recovery. I hadn't given up then, and I wasn't about to give up now. I stroked Max's ears, his steady breathing syncing with mine. "We'll handle this," I murmured. He lifted his head, eyes shining with that loyal steadiness I relied on. And in that moment, I knew that whatever storm Karen tried to create, Max and I would face it together. But deep down, I also knew this was only the beginning. The next morning started like any other, at least at first. I brewed coffee, fed Max, and tried to focus on the quiet hum of the neighborhood waking up. Birds chirped from the oak tree outside, sprinklers ticked rhythmically across a neighbor's lawn, and a delivery truck rumbled down the street. But even as I sipped my coffee, I couldn't shake the uneasy weight sitting in my stomach. The way Karen had stormed off yesterday didn't feel finished. It felt like the beginning of something bigger. When I opened the front door to grab the morning paper, my eyes landed on it immediately. A piece of paper was taped to my door, centered perfectly at eye level. Sealed with the HOA's official letterhead. My pulse jumped. I pulled it free, unfolded it, and began to read. The words were sharp, impersonal, written like a warning shot. Notice of violation. The letter cited HOA by 1 for B, the rule stating that no resident may keep an animal exceeding 30 pounds within the community limits. It accused me of non-compliance, gave me 10 days to remove Max from the property, and warned of daily fines if I failed to act. At the bottom, it was signed not by the board, but by Karen herself in her swirling, self-important handwriting. For a moment I just stood there with the paper trembling in my hand, anger and disbelief colliding inside me. It wasn't just the words, it was the audacity. She knew Max was a service animal, I had told her plainly. Yet here she was, trying to bulldoze me with an official threat, hoping I would cave out of fear or ignorance. I sat down at the kitchen table, Max trotting over to rest his chin on my knee. My fingers brushed his head automatically as I reread the notice. The familiar surge of anxiety began to rise in my chest, faster heartbeat, shallow breaths, the pressure in my ribs like a tightening band. Max noticed before I could even control it. He shifted his weight, leaning gently against me, his presence grounding me, reminding me I wasn't spiraling alone. Slowly, my breathing steadied. "Not this time, buddy," I whispered. "She's not going to win this one." I set the notice aside and went to the cabinet where I kept important papers. I pulled out the thick folder I had prepared months ago, anticipating exactly this sort of challenge. Inside were Max's official training records, his service dog, identification, medical notes from my doctor explaining why I needed him, and even copies of federal guidelines from the Americans with Disabilities Act. Each page was proof that Karen's so-called violation wasn't worth the ink it was printed with. I spread the documents across the table, lining them up neatly, the way I used to lay out gear before a long trip. It gave me the same sense of order, the same feeling that preparation was its own kind of armor. I knew the law. More importantly, I knew my rights. Karen's letter might scare someone else into giving up their dog, but it wasn't going to work on me. By mid-morning I decided to make the first move. I wrote a formal response addressed to the HOA attaching copies of Max's documentation. I explained, clearly and firmly, that Max was a service animal protected under federal law, and that HOA restrictions on pets did not apply. My words weren't angry, they were precise. I wanted no room for twisting or misinterpretation. As I sealed the envelope, I felt Max brush against my leg, almost as if he knew this was more than paperwork, it was a stand. I dropped the letter off at the HOA's mailbox and walked home, with a strange mix of nerves and resolve swirling in my chest. For the rest of the day, I tried to settle into normalcy. I took Max for another walk, mowed the lawn, even called my sister to chat about her kids starting school. But no matter what I did, I caught myself glancing out the window, half expecting Karen to appear with her clipboard, ready for another confrontation, and sure enough, late in the afternoon, I saw her marching down the street with 2 other board members trailing behind like reluctant soldiers. They stopped at the foot of my driveway. Karen called out, her voice sharp enough to carry across the yard. "We've received your response. We'll be reviewing it at the board meeting tomorrow night." The 2 men beside her looked less certain, their eyes flicking between me and the dog sitting calmly at my side. I raised an eyebrow, choosing my words carefully. "Good, make sure you review it thoroughly, because what you're doing is not just wrong, it's illegal." One of the men cleared his throat, looking uneasy, but Karen cut him off with a glare. "We'll see what the board has to say," she snapped, and then spun around, marching off like a general whose troops had disappointed her. When they were gone, I exhaled slowly, tension draining from my shoulders. I hated conflict. Before the accident, I had been easygoing, the kind of guy who avoided drama whenever possible. But trauma changes you. It strips away the luxury of walking away from battles that matter. This was one of those battles. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I lay in bed with Max curled near my feet, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan. My mind replayed every possible outcome of tomorrow's meeting: Karen shouting, neighbors whispering, me standing there with my folder of documents like a defendant in a trial. It wasn't just about me. It was about every person who relied on a service animal. Every person whose invisible struggles were so easily dismissed by someone with a clipboard and a rulebook. When I finally drifted off, it was restless. I dreamed of standing in front of the board, Max at my side, while Karen's voice thundered accusations. But in the dream, Max barked loud, powerful, and her voice silenced instantly, leaving only echoes. Morning came too quickly. I dressed neatly, gathered my folder, and clipped Max's vest in place. He wagged his tail once, steady and calm, ready as always. I knew Karen would try to twist this into something ugly, but I also knew I had something she didn't: truth, law, and Max. The day stretched on, every hour dragging me closer to the meeting. Neighbors waved at me in passing, some curious, others sympathetic, as if word of the notice had already begun to spread. One older gentleman even stopped me on my walk to say, "That dog of yours is a blessing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words gave me a jolt of courage, more powerful than he probably realized. That by the time the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange, I was ready. Max walked beside me as I headed toward the community hall where the meeting would be held. My grip tightened around the folder under my arm. Tonight, it wouldn't just be about rules. Tonight would be about standing up for myself, for Max, and for what was right. And as we approached the hall, the sound of voices inside buzzing with anticipation, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. This wasn't going to be easy. Karen would make sure of that. But no matter what happened, one thing was certain: Max and I weren't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The meeting hall was buzzing when I arrived. The low hum of voices carried through the glass doors, a mix of curiosity, boredom, and the sharp edge of neighborhood gossip. People sat on folding chairs lined in neat rows, the air stuffy from too many bodies packed into a small space. At the front was a long table where the HOA board sat, papers stacked neatly, water bottles lined up like props, and at the very center of it all, like a queen on her throne, sat Karen. She looked smug, a clipboard lying across the table in front of her as if it were an extension of her arm. When her eyes flicked to me, they narrowed, a tight smile stretching across her lips. It wasn't a welcoming smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives when it thinks the prey has wandered too close. I walked down the aisle, Max steady at my side, his vest gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Conversations hushed as people noticed us. I could feel their eyes following every step, some filled with curiosity, others with quiet support. Max moved with calm assurance, as if he knew this room was full of tension, but none of it mattered, as long as he stayed by me. I found a seat near the front, setting my folder on my lap. My heart was beating harder than I wanted to admit, each thud echoing in my ears. But I reminded myself I wasn't here to beg. I wasn't here to apologize. I was here to stand my ground. The board chair, an older man named Richard, tapped the microphone to bring the room to order. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like he was already dreading the storm that was about to hit. Tonight's agenda includes a review of a violation notice concerning a resident and his dog. he began, his eyes flicking briefly to me. We'll hear from the board and the resident before making any determinations. Karen leaned forward immediately, seizing the stage. This is a very serious matter, she announced, her voice loud enough to make heads turn. As everyone here knows, our community bylaws clearly state that no animals exceeding 30 pounds are permitted. These rules exist for the safety and comfort of all residents. Yet one homeowner has chosen to ignore these rules and keep a large, dangerous dog on the premises. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a few eyebrows raised, but others frowned, clearly uneasy at her words. I sat still, jaw tight, letting her dig her hole. Karen stood, holding up a printed copy of the bylaws. She waved it like holy scripture. This dog is not only in violation, but also a liability. What if it bites someone? What if it frightens the children? Rules are rules, and no one is above them. If we allow one exception, where does it end? The murmurs grew louder, people shifting in their seats. A man in the back raised his voice. That's ridiculous. I've seen that dog. He's calmer than half the people here. A few chuckles broke the tension, but Karen shot him a glare, if sharp enough to silence him. I waited until she was finished, then stood slowly, my folder clutched firmly in my hands. Max shifted with me, sitting tall, alert but relaxed, the very picture of discipline. I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. My name is Daniel, I began, my voice steady though my heart still pounded. And this is Max. He is not a pet. He is not a liability. He is a federally protected service animal. Karen scoffed audibly, but I pressed on. I opened my folder and held up the first page. This is documentation from my doctor, confirming my medical need for Max. This, I held up another paper, is proof of his service animal certification. And here I pulled out a printout, is the section of the Americans with Disabilities Act that makes it very clear. Housing rules regarding pets do not apply to service animals. They are exempt, period. Gasps and whispers spread through the room. I laid the papers on the board's table, sliding them toward Richard, who glanced through them with furrowed brows. The board members passed the documents along, nodding, slowly as they read. Karen's face flushed crimson. That doesn't matter, she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. This is private property. The HOA has authority here. Our bylaws are clear, and he's breaking them. A murmur of disagreement spread. A woman in the second row shook her head. Karen, if it's federal law, then your rules don't override that. Karen whipped around, her voice shrill. You don't understand. Rules are what keep this community safe. If we let him ignore them, everyone else will start ignoring them too. I stepped forward, my voice firmer now. This isn't about ignoring rules. This is about recognizing rights. Max isn't here because I want to skirt bylaws. He's here because I need him. He's trained to assist me with my disability. Without him, my daily life becomes a struggle. You don't have the right to strip that away from me, no matter what your clipboard says. The room erupted in quiet applause, a small but steady ripple of support. Karen's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for a retort, but the words caught in her throat. Richard cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Karen, it seems clear that federal law protects service animals regardless of HOA restrictions. Perhaps this is a matter that needs no further debate. Karen slammed her hand on the table. So what, you're just going to let him break the rules? That's the example we want to set. Another board member, a woman named Susan, spoke up. Her tone was sharp, cutting through the tension. Karen, what's the real issue here? The dog has never caused a problem. He's calm, trained, and clearly documented as a service animal. Why are you pushing this so hard? The room quieted again, all eyes shifting to Karen. For the first time, she looked cornered. She sputtered, because it's the principle. If we don't enforce rules, we lose control of the community. I took a deep breath and spoke again, softer this time. Control is not the same as fairness, and rules without compassion or understanding aren't rules worth following. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than I expected. A man in the back clapped once, then again, and soon a small wave of applause filled the room. Not thunderous, but enough to show me I wasn't standing alone. Karen's face was nearly purple now, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She sat down hard, folding her arms across her chest, glaring daggers at me. But the battle had shifted. For the first time, the board wasn't nodding along with her, they were nodding with me. Richard shuffled the papers again, then addressed the room. We'll take this under review and issue a formal decision, but based on the evidence presented tonight, it appears that this is not a violation under our bylaws when federal law is taken into account. The HOA will not pursue fines at this time. The applause was louder now, mixed with murmurs of relief. People began to stand, stretching, collecting their things. The meeting moved on to less dramatic matters, parking issues, landscaping budgets, but the energy in the room had shifted permanently. I sat back down, Max leaning against my leg. I reached down to scratch behind his ear, whispering, "Good boy, we did it." But deep inside I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wouldn't let this go, her pride wouldn't allow it. Tonight, she had been silenced, but tomorrow she would be plotting again, waiting for another angle. another way to come after us. And as I walked out of the meeting hall with Max by my side, the cool night air rushing against my face, I promised myself I would be ready. No matter how many battles she wanted to start, I wouldn't back down. Not from her. Not from anyone. Because Max wasn't just a dog. He was my anchor, my protection, my proof that I could still stand tall even when the world tried to push me down, and no HOA, no clipboard, and certainly no Karen was ever going to take him away from me. The days following the HOA meeting felt strange, like living in a storm's eye, quiet on the surface, but heavy with the sense that something was coming. Max and I carried on as usual, taking our morning walks, keeping the house in order, but the neighborhood seemed to buzz differently. Some people gave me knowing nods as we passed, others whispered behind clipped hands, clearly repeating pieces of what they'd heard at the meeting. The air felt charged, and at the center of it all was Karen. She was quieter than usual, which was more unsettling than her constant scolding. Normally she patrolled the neighborhood daily, clipboard in hand, scanning for grass blades an inch too tall or trash cans left out 10 minutes too long. Now though, I only caught glimpses of her. She would be on her porch, speaking sharply into her phone, or standing by her mailbox, rifling through papers with her brows furrowed so tightly they looked carved into her forehead. She was plotting. I could feel it. On the fourth day, the letter came. This one wasn't handwritten by Karen. It bore the HOA seal, typed and stamped as if to add weight. I unfolded it at my kitchen table, Max's head resting on my knee like always, and scanned the lines. It claimed that while I had presented some documentation, the board required additional proof to verify Max's status. They wanted medical records beyond the doctor's letter, details about his training, and even clarification about the scope of his tasks. The tone was cold, clinical, but between the lines I could read Karen's voice loud and clear. This wasn't a request for clarity, it was intimidation. My hands trembled slightly as I set the paper down. They weren't just challenging Max's role, they were probing into my private life, asking for details they had no right to demand. My medical records were mine, not something to be passed around a boardroom table. The ADA was clear. Housing providers could only ask 2 questions. Is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And what tasks has the dog been trained to perform? That was it. They had no right to dig deeper. But try telling Karen that. Max nudged me gently. Sensing my rising anxiety, I rubbed his ears, breathing slowly. "We're not letting them push us around, buddy," I whispered. Still, my mind raced. I knew my rights, but I needed more than certainty. I needed backup. That evening I called a local disability rights center. A kind woman named Laura answered, and I explained everything from Karen's first confrontation to the letters, the meeting, and now this new demand. She listened patiently, occasionally making small affirmations that told me she understood. When I finished, she said, "They are absolutely out of line. They cannot demand private medical records, and they cannot harass you into proving more than you already have. If you're open to it, I'd be happy to connect you with one of our attorneys who specializes in housing discrimination." Relief washed over me so strong I nearly laughed. "Yes," I said, "please, that would mean everything." The next day I spoke with a lawyer. His name was Michael, a man with a calm, steady voice that carried the weight of someone who had been down this road many times before. I emailed him all the letters, all my documentation, and he confirmed what I already knew. The HOA was skating on thin legal ice. "They're harassing you," he said bluntly, "and if they don't stop they'll be facing a federal complaint." Hearing it framed so directly gave me courage. For days, I had felt cornered by Karen's persistence, like she was slowly tightening the walls around me. But now, I had someone on my side who knew the system better than she did. Someone who could outmatch her clipboard with actual law. Next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Michael offered to come with me, free of charge. "Sometimes all it takes is someone stating the law plainly in the right room," he said. I agreed instantly. That Thursday, the meeting hall was more crowded than usual. Word had spread, and people were curious. Max walked calmly beside me, his vest strapped securely, his steps measured and confident. Michael walked on my other side, carrying only a slim briefcase, his expression unreadable but purposeful. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, sneaking glances at me, at Max, and at the unfamiliar man with me. Karen was already seated at the board table, her posture stiff, her lips pressed thin. The moment she saw Michael, her brows shot up, then furrowed deeply. She knew he wasn't just another neighbor. Richard, the board chair, cleared his throat as the meeting began. "Tonight we'll continue our discussion regarding the service animal in question." Before Karen could leap in, Michael stood. His voice was calm but carried across the room with ease. "Good evening. My name is Michael Adams, and I'm an attorney specializing in disability rights and housing law. I'm here with Daniel to ensure this matter is handled according to federal law." The room erupted in whispers. Karen's face turned a blotchy red, her fingers tightening around her clipboard. She opened her mouth, but Michael continued smoothly, cutting off whatever she had been about to spit. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act both make it crystal clear that service animals are not pets. And pet restrictions, size, weight, or breed limitations do not apply. Furthermore, housing providers, including HOAs, are strictly limited in what they may ask. They may not demand medical records. They may not demand excessive documentation. They may only ask two simple questions. Is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And what tasks has it been trained to perform? Daniel has already answered those questions and provided supporting documentation. The matter should end there. Silence filled the room. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen sputtered, her voice shrill. But we have rules. This is private property. Surely those rules still mean something. Michael turned to her, his gaze level, his tone unwavering. Rules do not supersede federal law if you continue to harass my client. This HOA opens itself up to a federal lawsuit for discrimination, and I can assure you, those lawsuits do not end favorably for HOAs that ignore the law. The murmurs grew louder, some neighbors nodding, others casting judgmental glances at Karen. She looked around wildly, as if searching for support, but the board members kept their eyes down. Suddenly fascinated by their papers, Susan, the board, a member who had spoken up at the last meeting, finally raised her voice. I think this has gone far enough. Daniel has provided everything necessary. We need to put this to rest before it gets any uglier. A wave of agreement spread through the room. Heads nodded, voices muttered in assent. Richard sighed heavily, then looked directly at Karen. I believe Susan is right. This issue has been clarified, and the board will not be pursuing any further action. Karen's jaw dropped. For once, she had no words. Her face burned crimson, and she sank into her chair, gripping her clipboard like a lifeline. Michael gave a polite nod, then sat back down. I felt a rush of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked me over. Max nudged my leg with his nose, steady as always, as if to say, see, we've got this. As the meeting moved on to other mundane topics, the tension in the room slowly eased. Neighbors began sneaking smiles at me, small nods of support that felt like little victories. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. But I also knew something else. Karen wouldn't forget this. She had been humiliated, outshined in the one arena where she believed she was untouchable. And people like her didn't just let that go. She would stew, she would plot, she would wait. Still, as I walked out of the hall that night with Max at my side and Michael shaking my hand firmly, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever Karen had left in her, I wasn't facing it alone anymore. I had Max, I had the law, and now I had proof that even Karen's power had limits. The night air felt different as I stepped outside. The weight was still there, but it no longer pressed me down, it pushed me forward. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled as I walked home, Max's paws patting softly on the sidewalk beside me. The HO's decision finally came down a week after that tense meeting, and though I had prepared myself for another battle, the result stunned even me. A neatly folded envelope appeared in my mailbox with the HOA seal stamped across the top. My heart beat hard as I held it in my hands, Max sitting obediently at my side as if he, too, understood the weight of this moment. For months I had lived under the constant threat of fines, harassment, and pressure to give up the one creature who anchored me in my hardest moments. Now, with trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope. The letter inside was brief but powerful. It began with the HOA acknowledging that Max was a certified service animal, fully protected by federal law. It went on to rescind every warning, fine, and threat I had received over the past months. It concluded with something I never thought I'd see, an apology, though carefully worded, for any undue stress or inconvenience caused. I sank into the porch chair with the letter in my hands, relief flooding over me like cool water on a blistering day. Max nudged my knee with his nose, sensing my shift in energy, and I laughed softly. We did it, buddy, I whispered, scratching behind his ears. The victory, though sweet, wasn't just about me. It was about every person who had ever been bullied, every neighbor who had faced unfair treatment, every family who had endured Karen's wrath. It was about principle. And in the days that followed, it became clear that the neighborhood saw it that way. Word spread quickly. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the community's attitude had changed. People were tired of Karen's endless battles, tired of her constant need to wield authority like a weapon. Some neighbors began to stop by my porch to congratulate me, offering smiles, kind words, and even baked goods as tokens of support. For years, many had been afraid to cross Karen, afraid of her clipboard and her threats. But my fight with her had cracked the illusion of her power. At the next meeting, I didn't even have to speak. The neighbors carried the argument for me. Parents spoke about how Karen had once tried to ban kids from chalk drawings on the sidewalk. A retired couple mentioned how she fined them over the wrong color of flowers in their garden. A young family shared how she threatened them when their toddler's inflatable pools sat in the front yard for 2 days. Each story poured out like water breaking through a dam. And then came the vote. Karen stood at the front of the room, her arms crossed, her face growing redder by the second as neighbors lined up against her. For the first time, she wasn't in control. When the ballot came around, the result was decisive. Karen was voted off the HOA board. The silence that followed her exit was thick, heavy with both relief and disbelief. She stormed out of the room, without a word, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Her pride shattered. In the weeks that followed, life began to change. The HOA, now led by more reasonable members, softened its stance on many things. People decorated their yards more freely. Kids played outside without fear of reprimand, and neighbors actually started gathering for small block parties again. The tight grip that Karen had enforced loosened, and our neighborhood felt like a community again. As for me, I could finally walk Max in peace. No more suspicious glares, no more angry notes, no more hostile confrontations. Each morning when I stepped out with Max by my side, I felt not just relief, but pride. He wasn't just my service animal, he had become a symbol of resilience in our neighborhood. Kids loved to wave at him, neighbors greeted him by name, and he carried himself with a calm confidence that seemed to say he knew exactly how important he was. But the most important change was within me. For months I had felt trapped, cornered by an unfair system that tried to take away the very thing keeping me afloat. That fear had made me small, made me doubt myself. But standing up to Karen, facing her attacks head-on, and proving her wrong in front of everyone gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: strength. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange and pink, I sat on my porch with Max lying at my feet. A few neighbors wandered by, waving and chatting, and I realized how different everything felt. Karen's absence was like a weight lifted from the air. I thought back to the day she first tried to take Max from me, how her words had cut like knives, how powerless I had felt. Now, with Max breathing steadily beside me, I felt the complete opposite. Karen herself kept a low profile after her removal. I'd occasionally see her in her yard, fussing with plants or shuffling trash cans, her head down and her movements sharp. She no longer marched across streets or waved her clipboard like a badge. She avoided eye contact when Max and I walked by. And though a small part of me wanted to gloat, I didn't. I had no need for revenge. The truth had spoken loudly enough, and everyone had heard it. The final chapter of this story wasn't about Karen's downfall, though. It was about Max and me, about how we had come through fire and come out stronger. He was still the same, loyal, steady companion who helped me through panic attacks, nightmares, and the hard days. But now, he also represented something greater: proof that no one, not even the most powerful bully in the neighborhood, could strip away my rights or my dignity. Months later, the neighborhood was more alive than I'd ever seen it. Children's laughter filled the evenings. Neighbors invited one another to barbecues, and even small acts of kindness became common. And at the center of it all, Max and I walked together, free of fear, free of threats, free of the shadow that Karen had once cast over us. One night, lying in bed with Max curled up near my feet, I realized how much this fight had shaped me. It wasn't just about keeping my dog. It was about standing up for myself when someone tried to take away what mattered most. It was about showing others that they, too, had a voice, that bullies only win if we let them. And it was about recognizing the quiet, steady strength of loyalty, whether from a neighbor who supported me or a dog who never once left my side. In the end, Karen had lost far more than she'd tried to take. She lost her power, her influence, and the respect of her neighbors. I, on the other hand, had gained something priceless: the reassurance that I could fight back, the trust of my community, and the unshakable bond with the dog who saved me every day in ways most people would never understand. Max was more than a service animal. He was my family, my anchor, my reminder that no matter how dark things got, I was never alone. And now, he was also the reason an entire neighborhood finally stood up to a bully. As I watched him sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling, I smiled. "We made it, Max," I whispered. "We made it." And this time there was no more fear, no more threats, only peace. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Bright Reality on YouTube for more powerful real-life stories. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps bring more truth to light.